The authenticity that kind of is baked into that approach. How do you see that also playing out in public?
I mean, I was featured on a billboard in Times Square this year, and it was
Nice.
I was like, I've made it. I don't know why I felt that way. It just felt really big.
All right. We are here with Lindsay Sheftick on the latest episode of Billboards, Bets, and a Bit of Booze. Welcome, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Very excited to be here.
This is very exciting because this is the first guest that has actually been on the marketing side, on the buy side. Everyone up until now has been on the platform side, technology side, industry side. So it's very special, and I'm honored to have you kick it off as the first CMO on the podcast.
Thank you. That's I don't know if that's scary or special or exciting or what.
Yeah, exactly. We were blazing a trail. So you're
Blazing.
You're pioneering for all future CMOs on
Perfect.
BBB.
Love it.
Starting today.
CMOs, watch out.
Let's see.
You got big shoes to fill.
I know. Let's see how high the bar can be raised. Let's go. So on our podcast, we're here in Las Vegas, and we have a fun little routine of opening it up with a little game of roulette.
Okay.
So I don't know if you're a red or a black gal, but you're going to have an opportunity to bet $100,
All right.
and depending upon the outcome, it'll determine what we're going to drink.
All right. Let's go for red.
Okay, so red 25, 3 more bets.
All right. Let's go for even.
Even. I like it.
And then let's see. Third 12.
Third 12. This is the first, I think, you could see, right, guys, how the bets are different than any other guest has ever made before. It's very unique, okay? And the grand finale?
Let's put 25 more on even.
All right. Let's do it.
You
All
can
right.
tell how much
no
I
more-
gamble.
You're feeling the even. We're feeling the even.
Feeling the even.
Feeling the even in the red. Here we go. And even. Oh.
All right.
Winner, winner, winner. Look at that. So a red, an even. Wow. You crushed that bet. All right, dinner's on you.
Perfect.
Dinner's on Lindsay. What do we have here? If you want to.
Oh, wow.
So what are we cracking
bourbon.
into?
A bourbon.
Okay, so it looks like we have here a Stellum bourbon. This is 116.22 proof,
Okay.
and it's cask strength. And so you know what that means? It means that this came straight from the cask to the bottle to our mouth.
Wow.
No additives, no water, nothing else. So let's give it a little taste.
All right.
It smells good.
I got to smell it. Ooh.
Ooh. Cheers.
Cheers.
Salud. Comet Rising.
Ooh.
What do you say?
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Her eyes are wide.
Yeah.
So there's a comet is blazing through your body right at the moment.
It really is blazing.
So we met in Cannes.
Very fancy. We only like to meet in fancy places.
I'm telling you, from Cannes to New York to Las Vegas, we know how
Yep.
to do it. And it was at the Cannes Lions Festival, and I believe you were speaking
Yep.
to our industry, the CEOs of the industry. And so before we get into some of the bets that in the future casting of how you see the industry sort of evolving, just for our guests to learn a little bit about your background and where you came from and kind of what brought you to the studio today.
Sure. So, I grew up in St. Louis. I got to give a shout out to my hometown. I know we have a connection there as well.
Absolutely.
And, I started my career out on the agency side. And, I like to say I've placed a lot of bets in my career. I've always tried to kind of like read the tea leaves and see what was that next big thing in the industry and then get a lot of experience around that area. So I've kind of bounced from agency side to client side, back to agency side, back to client side. Every time I go back to the agency, I'm like, why did I go back to the agency and back to the client side? But I think, digital has definitely been, something that has been woven throughout my career, and really trying to stay on the cutting edge of content. And, when social started developing algorithm, that's something I really wanted to know a lot about, and went back to agency to get some like really in-depth experience there. And so, yeah, my latest engagement, I was the head of marketing CMO for Ring for Amazon. And I left in August to start my own consulting company called the CMO Sidekick. And really what I started seeing was that there was, a need for senior level advisement for CMOs that just CMOs couldn't, hire internally and or have like that right support. And so I've become this right hand to CMOs working across a variety of clients, and just really helping figuring out anything from positioning to brand strategy to helping with, content strategy, creative RFPs, media RFPs, and just kind of giving that senior level consulting and advisement. So it's been pretty fun so far.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I mean, the variety of different things that you've done. So Ring, I mentioned earlier to me before the show, the Red Bull background.
Yep.
That was probably a really interesting brands to be working with.
Yep. I was the head of consumer marketing for Vans for 2.5 years. So I worked on the footwear apparel side.
Cool.
Yep. Worked at Red Bull for 5 years, have automotive experience, worked on Volkswagen and Toyota, did a couple-year stint on Apple, just, that little hardware brand.
Oh, I've heard of them before. And has it been mostly B2C across that whole journey? So really focused on consumer.
Mostly B2C. I did early in my career worked in AT&T, which was B2B, and then most recently at Ring did some B2B work for Ring, developing their B2B IP and how they're going to come to market for that.
Yeah,
so.
Very cool. So I would argue that CMOs might be one of the hardest jobs in corporate America, and I think there's a pressure situation there, but there's also this very fluid, dynamic market. Forget even a pandemic and the post-pandemic world that we're in, but just generally speaking. So let's start with just like how you see CMOs today, like figuring out where they should be investing, what they should be doing, what they should not be doing, how they're using measurement systems. Because to me, I feel like there's a lot of noise out there.
Yeah.
I'd love your perspective on that.
It is. I would say the role has changed quite a bit over the last, 3 to 5 years. And for me, figuring out how to invest our dollars and where to invest our dollars, it's a little bit of an art and a science. And, for me, it's being current and what's, happening in marketplace. It's balancing performance, but also brand. I see a lot of brands that are just doing performance marketing, and 3 to 5 years down the road, they're just going to be dead. They're just spending so much money for people who are in demand for product. They're not really building the brand over time. So, they're still continuing to pay. They're going to continue to pay that high rate to acquire new customers. So I think for me, it's just kind of a balance of like gut and experience, but also looking at the data and looking at the measurement that you can do in and outside a platform, and, try to piece it together to get the best kind of picture of the larger story.
Just the sheer number of ways that your dollar can be chopped up. How do you manage all that?
I think for me, I like to keep my strategy simple. I think when you go and you slice your dollars too thin and you slice your audiences too thin, that's really where you run into trouble. I've seen more startups or mid-sized companies, and they're across 50 different partners, and they're kind of not having enough frequency or enough wear-in and enough reach on that platform to really inundate that customer. I think you can look cross-channel, and in some areas you can look cross-channel to make sure that you're, heavy in certain places or lighter in other places. But for me, it's like keeping a really simple strategy and having an audience first strategy and being very focused on who you're trying to reach. And I think like for me, the video industry has changed a lot in the last couple of years. And, I had an agency that I was working with in the last year, And when they came to do an RFP for us, they really talked about this, like being screen agnostic and just reaching customers where they were, like not worrying about, we're going to slice up this much for linear and this much for streaming and this much for out of home and this much for YouTube. It was more of looking, where are the customers, who are we trying to reach, and then we're going to just pick very efficient and smart channels to reach them in, depending on where they are, versus just trying to like slice up that budget in advance.
Yeah, the whole omni channel push where like it's all these different touch points working together, but not necessarily beholden to historical allocations.
Yeah.
How often were you changing your playbook, even at Ring for a couple of years? Like, what was the frequency that you were like rethinking what that mix should be?
I think every year. I mean, I think looking at, I think like trying to move a brand who's been doing more traditional things into more digital platforms, whether it's, streaming or programmatic, or just, thinking more holistically about cross-channel reach and frequency is, I think, something every marketer probably struggles with. Like especially if you're more probably a younger CMO or a more modern CMO, you're, thinking about that digital strategy and you're trying to kind of pull dollars out of maybe some of the more traditional channels that maybe the dollars were sitting in because it was easier to buy and execute. And so I think it's like really thinking about, how you make those baby steps and those step changes in your strategy every year to get like leadership comfortable with making the shift. Like, I don't believe in kind of making like super radical change because I feel like if your strategy is kind of working, it's kind of working. You're just like, you're optimizing it every year. You're making it better. So I think it's about like testing new partners and making sure that you've got, that testing budget to put new partners into the mix. And then I think it's about making like those baby steps.
But when you think of just like the rapid pace of change, where I liken and others have linear TV to a melting ice cube.
Yeah.
And every one of those droplets of attention leaving that channel and going toward phone platforms like TikTok or YouTube. But just the notion that, Gen Z, millennials are going to behave differently than those that are older. Thinking about your ideal audience, which I know it's product specific, but like the thought process that goes into, here's an emerging channel. You see the stats that are being reported by the major platforms, eMarketer or Digiday or anything like that. How do you approach and how do you recommend approaching for CMOs the testing process and making those incremental changes?
I still think influencers being like very underutilized. I see influencers still being a little bit of like a bolt-on strategy versus like part of your overarching strategy. I think influencer is a media channel in of itself, but it's also content generation and authentic content for your brand. And then I think also like not utilizing that content, like being able to take that content and use it in different channels, I think is really important. A couple of the last brands I worked with, we were taking great content and then we were putting them in other places and highlighting them in other channels, like for example, in digital, programmatic out of home, like being able to extend your content onto bigger screens and into different places. This is content people love to consume in their phones. Like, why wouldn't they love to consume it in other places?
Right.
And I've seen brands kind of utilizing social content and CTV in other places, and I really think that there's a value. And I don't want to say repurposing, but using content that your customers are engaging with and really enjoy on, platforms that also have high scale.
Yeah. The authenticity that kind of is baked into that approach. How do you see that also playing out in public, where creators show up in public and brands support them showing up in public? How do you see that dynamic on both the creator side and on the marketer side sort of playing itself out? Because we're obviously making some big bets on the Adomni side, but I'd love to hear your perspective.
I think it's huge. I think that, creators have become and influencers have become celebrities within themselves, right? And, I think taking a lot of influencers, they're off doing comedy, they're out, doing things in the real world, they're having appearances, they're at events. And I think that taking that content more in the real world, as these people are just definitely more recognizable than, and or as recognizable as any other celebrity, sometimes I would argue even more. And I also feel like there's like an accessibility with an influencer, and that they seem like they're like you, right? Like whether it's a mom or it's, somebody just doing something similar to what you're doing, that I think gives like a connection to yourself versus maybe like a celebrity you're not really feeling an emotional connection to. And you're going to take an endorsement a little bit differently versus if you're going to see something from an influencer.
And that's one of our bets, is that the democratization of influence is what TikTok and YouTube have created, and Instagram.
Yep.
But it seems historically, for whatever reason, it ended in the phone or on the computer. And we've got videos, some fun videos of the reactions that creators have and seeing themselves
Oh, yeah.
out in the marketplace. So for us, it's really exciting to like actually not just have them extend into the physical world, but then capture what's happening in the physical world and bring it back to social.
Yeah.
And seeing that kind of 360
Totally.
approach.
I mean, I was featured on a billboard in Times Square this year, and it was
Nice.
I was like, I've made it. I don't know why I felt that way. It just felt really big. And like, I had a picture of it, and, I posted it. I don't ever really post on Facebook anymore, but I was like, I'm going to post this on Facebook. This seems like what that audience would like. And it was like the most liked thing, commented thing that anyone had ever seen. It was pretty funny. And
Yeah, point of pride. Yeah, it's a point of pride. And so then the question is, if it has this emotional value, and you see CMOs all the time bragging about their Times Square placement or their Piccadilly Circus, whatever it is, why are the budgets not flowing to the channel that people love and want to be on and want to celebrate after they're on? What do you think is holding back unlocking the budgets for, let's call it, real world, formerly digital out of home, still digital out of home, but what's holding it back?
I think there's a few things. I think that there's still, I like to call mythbusters. Like, I still think there's myths around the channel that the channel has changed so much, but there's just like a lack of education. And I think that, especially like in the agencies, I feel like your digital buyers and your, people who have come up digital, out of home is something that's like archaic to them, and it's sat on the side, a side team, and they maybe don't know much about it. And I think that, so there's a lack of education on the agency side when, you have an integrated planner coming to the table with a recommendation for a plan. Out of home seems like always like a bolt on or an afterthought. The other thing is just, the channel has changed so much in terms of targeting. We talk about mass media, right? And that's mass media to, I think, a lot of people means not targeted. It means you're talking to everybody. I think with digital out of home, with tracking that can be done now, with knowing who is by boards and understanding that you can actually find an addressable audience at scale and target them in specific locations, where they're at, where they shop, where they live, is something completely new that is probably like an unlock for marketers. I think also this perception that out of home is like so expensive. Oh my gosh, it's so expensive. The production is expensive. I think even digital seems expensive, even though I know that there's lots of automation in creating the creative. Like, I don't think it's as, I think that's a myth. And I think now that you can buy it programmatically and you can also shut it off. I think the old myth of, oh, you put out a home up, you're committed to a month or two or whatever the run of the board is. That is not a thing anymore. Now I see that changing over like just the last year.
Yeah, and with the trends that are happening right now in just marketing in general, where privacy is obviously changed a lot already, we don't have that issue in the real world. We never relied upon the one-to-one and that sort of thing. The second was around just this omni planning approach, where television now, CTV, is being planned alongside video, display, audio, even digital audio. So do you think that those forces actually also have CMOs kind of rethinking how this fits in?
I think so. I think that, again, it's just like another way to extend the reach of your campaigns, like in a digital way. And I think I do think, and I was saying it's like a little bit of like an art and a science. I think that, in the past, like out of home, you just look at it from like a big brand perspective, or you're going to have a big brand campaign. And I think now, because the targeting is so much better, you can really look at it to help drive considerations for your campaigns and be more middle, lower funnel. And so I think sitting next to where I feel like linear is still considered above the line, but CTV seems to be sitting more mid, right, consideration. And I think that's really kind of more where digital out of home is going to come, and how you buy it, how you can target, and then where you would put that in the playbook of your marketing plans.
Yeah. Yeah, we like to compare CTV to the cousin of digital out of home, or video digital out of home, because it literally is, in most cases, televisions that look the same as what you have on your wall in the home, just in a public place.
I find myself less and less on my phones in store these days. So I feel like, now that us humans are back out in the world, like it seems interesting to layer on, like, what does that experience with your brand feel like when that person is out of the home and they're in a shopping mode, and, they're not just staring at you're competing with your TV, your iPad, your kid's iPad, your phone, all happening at the same time.
Right.
So I just think there's more attention there than there ever has been.
Yeah.
We did just spend all this time at home with our heads down and our screens, and I think people are like really starting to lift their heads up.
Talk a little bit about how you see creative in today's day and age, where, like you said, influencer authentic is important, but how does that play itself out on these big screens in the real world? And any predictions there?
I think that this like influencer creative, or creative that just feels and looks more authentic, is going to take over that space. I'd love to see some video out there of just stuff that find visually interesting, like in the TikTok world, like people like playing with things, or like using products in different ways. And I think that there's, something to be said for that type of content when you're either at like a point of purchase, or, you're just seeing something out in real life that looks like something that you kind of like have seen on your phone, or something similar to on your phone. And maybe you're actually more interested in it because you're like, oh, that's kind of cool. So I do feel like showing some of this more raw creative in real life is going to become a big thing. That's a future thing. I don't think a lot of brands are doing that right now, but if I was, where I was at before, and wherever I go next, and or the brands I'm working with right now in my consulting, like that is how I'm trying to direct content strategy and really create that connection with customers today and how they like to consume content.
Yeah. And look, I mean, TikTok is shaking it up with a lot of different things. A lot of people are talking about the shopping, what's happening now with shopping, the commerce on TikTok and everywhere else. But TikTok's out of phone program, where Adomni's a partner, hopefully is the first major sort of showcase of you extending what you're putting on platform, off platform, and it works.
Yeah.
It actually does kind of hit hard.
Yeah. I think if you have like great content that's going to work here, it's most likely going to work in a bigger placement, and you're going to have, be able to extend your reach and, have more familiarity. And I think it's going to be huge. Like I think what you guys are doing is awesome. I know we met in Cannes. We also reconnected in New York, right? I think right before you had this announcement, and you and I talked a little bit about it, and I was like, wow, that's going to be cool. Like that is going to be huge. Like I think that, brands are making all this like really great content. Now they just have more places that they can put it that scale. And, why limit some of the things that you're doing to one channel? It's just like when you make a TV spot and you make 15 cut downs and 6 cut downs and you put them in all these different places. Why wouldn't you leverage this really authentic, great content that you're making in social especially in a video channel that has some of the biggest boards in the world and or sitting at point of purchase, it just seems like a no-brainer to me.
Yeah, totally. And we see it the same way, and the convergence is happening. And I think it's marketers like you that, are leaning in and talking about it and thinking about it and ultimately start doing it, getting the flywheel turning and then the case studies that come out. So we're excited. We're very, very excited. Well, thank you for stopping by today. It was really nice to see you.
Thanks for having me so much. It was so fun to be here.
Great to see you as always.
Thank you.
Take care.